This is Francis Pouliot, the founder of Bull Bitcoin, the world's greatest non-custodial Bitcoin company. Today, I'm here to present RecoverBull, an encrypted Bitcoin wallet backup and recovery protocol, which is live in the Bull Bitcoin wallet today. You can grab it on the Google Play Store, on the Apple App Store. It is both Android and iOS. First, I'm going to talk about the problem that we are trying to solve with Bitcoin wallet backups and our philosophy and how we're solving this problem. Then I'm going to do a demo of RecoverBull and how it looks like in the Bull Bitcoin wallet. And finally, I'm going to go into an in-depth technical discussion of how RecoverBull works under the hood. Bull Bitcoin's mission is and always has been to help individuals and businesses reclaim their financial sovereignty. And we do that by building infrastructure, tools, apps, and services that allow them to buy, sell, spend, receive, and hold Bitcoin without compromise. Bitcoin grants its users absolute property rights over their money, which they can enforce and assert without relying on a trusted third party. It allows them to make censorship-resistant transactions with a very high degree of anonymity. And these features, which make Bitcoin valuable as money, are properties that emerge and that are a consequence of users being able to generate cryptographic keys themselves and use them to sign valid Bitcoin transactions, a concept which we call self-custody. If you don't self-custody your Bitcoin, you don't own Bitcoin. If you don't own Bitcoin, you don't own money. If you don't own money, someone else owns your money for you. And if someone else owns your money for you, you are a slave. And that is what we are trying to prevent at Bull Bitcoin. We've identified 4 major pain points with self-custody, and our mission is to solve them. The first issue is fiat on-ramp and off-ramp in a self-custodial or non-custodial way. Bull Bitcoin is the world's possibly largest, certainly best non-custodial Bitcoin exchange. We've been doing this for 12 years, so that problem has already been solved. The other issue is payment speed and cost. We all know that it takes a long time for a Bitcoin transaction to confirm, at least 10 minutes on average or more, and that Bitcoin network fees can be expensive, which makes using Bitcoin to pay for your groceries on chain quite a horrible experience. We have solved that in the Bull Bitcoin wallet by integrating the Liquid and the Lightning network. So the 2 issues that we're trying to solve next are helping users create secure Bitcoin backups and helping users set up their inheritance plans. Inheritance is possibly the most important issue right now for me, but it is also a very, very big piece to swallow. So we're going to save that for next year. So this year we've decided to focus on helping users create Bitcoin wallet backups. So what's the point of a Bitcoin wallet backup? Well, the point is that if you have your Bitcoin keys on a phone or a laptop and you lose that phone or laptop and you don't have a backup, you lose all your money. There's a lot of ways for you to lose access to your wallet. Your phone or laptop can be broken. You can accidentally delete the app from your phone, or you can accidentally delete the data storage from your laptop. You can lose access to your wallet, like you forgot the PIN, or there's a bug in the software, or there's data corruption. On a long enough timeline, you will lose access to your wallet. It's like a mathematical guarantee. So that problem has actually been solved about 12 years ago with the invention of something that we call the Bitcoin mnemonic, or the Bitcoin seed, or in technical terms, BIP39. So in order to back up your Bitcoin wallet, all you have to do is to write down 12 words or 24 words on a piece of paper, and you're good to go. In theory, it sounds easy. In practice, not so much. I've orange-pilled tens of thousands of people. I've installed thousands of wallets. And every single time, the backup part of my explanation and my orange pill session is the backup. This concept of needing to back up your money is a new responsibility that people are not used to. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around that. People are used to having password resets or calling your bank if something goes wrong. And many times you're orange pilling someone, you're doing it at a very inopportune moment. Think about that time that you orange pilled your friends at a bar and it was late at night, or you're orange pilling your taxi driver and he's in a rush, or you're orange pilling your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner and you've all had a little bit to drink and you're in a very loud place. It's not always the best time to explain the intricacies and the importance of how to do a secure backup. And you need to make sure that people understand what you're telling them when you're orange pilling them about the backup. That's your responsibility as the orange pillar. So every time I orange pill someone, I end up basically telling them all the ways that they can get screwed. If you don't do a backup and you lose your device, you're screwed. If you lose your backup, you're screwed. So you should probably buy a metal plate and maybe even two and put them in two separate hiding places. But if someone finds your backup, your hiding place, you're screwed because whoever finds your backup can take your Bitcoin. So you should add a BIP39 passphrase to your wallet. But you are probably not going to be able to generate a passphrase that is strong enough. And if you can't generate a passphrase that's strong enough and someone finds your backup, they can brute force that passphrase. So you have to generate a random and very long passphrase. And if you try to remember that, you might be able to for a while, but probably you're going to forget it. And if you forget that, you're locked out of your wallet, you lose your funds. So you have to do a backup of your passphrase as well. But here's the kicker. You cannot hide the backup of your passphrase at the same place where you hide the backup of your seed, of your wallet, because if someone finds that hiding place, they have the seed, they have the passphrase, they can recombine it and steal your Bitcoin. So you're going to need to have two different hiding places, one for your seed and one for your passphrase. And then if you die, that's a whole other story. I'm not saying this is impossible. I'm also not saying that this is actually very hard, but let's be realistic. This is not the ideal way to introduce someone to Bitcoin. There must be a better way. So here are the alternatives to this whole explanation and making sure that people got it right. Well, first of all, you can tell people that Bitcoin's not for you. If you can't handle this procedure of backup and passphrase and metal plates and vaults and so on and so forth, Bitcoin's not for you. Don't get into Bitcoin. I don't believe in that. The other thing that people are doing a lot nowadays is telling people, hey, Bitcoin's really too complicated for you. Just go into your Robinhood account and buy some MicroStrategy stocks or buy some ETFs. Also, I don't believe in that. So the other option is to tell people, hey, just buy Bitcoin on Coinbase and leave it in your Coinbase or your Binance account. You should probably trust them more than trust yourself. Also not the whole point of Bitcoin. The other thing that people are doing also is telling people, hey, why don't you use Wallet of Satoshi or Blink or Bitcoin Jungle? Use a custodial wallet. It's a lot easy. And, you try to tell them yeah, but later in the future, withdraw it to your own wallet, but they never actually end up withdrawing to their own wallet. They always leave it with the custodian. Another solution is collaborative custody. There's multiple models. Some of them are multi-sigs with a recovery key. Some of them have a hardware component like Casa or BitKey. There's all sorts of multi-sig services with recovery services. And there's also hardcore cypherpunk solutions like Miniscript-based multi-sig wallets with time-locked recovery paths. But none of these solutions fit the right set of trade-offs on the user experience and compromise matrix. And what I mean by that is that either the solution makes too much compromise, like custodial wallet or leaving your funds on an exchange, even though it's really easy, or maybe it doesn't make a lot of compromise, but it's really hard, Miniscript multisig, or it requires the user to buy a special device or something like that. So there's no point where it's really easy, and also it doesn't make a lot of compromise or the minimum amount of compromise. And that's what we're trying to do with RecoverBull. So what are our design goals? Well, first of all, we're not trying to replace hardware wallets. We are not trying to replace long-term cold storage, and we're not trying to replace multi-sig. So RecoverBull is not an alternative to these things. It is an alternative to custodial wallets, to hot wallet physical backups, and to passphrases for hot wallet physical backups. So think about it like this. It's an alternative to a Coinbase account. It's an alternative to a Wallet of Satoshi wallet. It's an alternative to having just a seed with your mobile wallet and a passphrase. So it's not cold storage. This is really a hot wallet, day-to-day spending wallet solution. All right, so what are our design goals? Well, first of all, I believe that Bitcoin users are allowed to be uneducated, unwise, unmotivated, unskilled, or incompetent, even maybe drunk. Controversial, but that's what I'm going for. Anonymity is inseparable from security. Any service or product or app that handles Bitcoin wallet backups should prioritize anonymity because any information revealed by a Bitcoin user, including merely the fact that he owns Bitcoin, can be used against him by an attacker. A backup process should take about 2 minutes or less to complete and should be very easy because that's the time that I have when I'm in the taxi and orange pilling the taxi driver. A backup should maintain its security and anonymity regardless of the location or device of the end user as much as possible. You shouldn't have to go into a Faraday cage with a 2006 Dell laptop that has been refitted with Tails operating system in order to create a secure backup as much as possible. Any service whose function is to facilitate Bitcoin wallet backups should avoid ever taking possession of user private keys, encrypted or otherwise, whether it's one key of a 2 of 3 multisig or an encrypted key, because you want that service to avoid being classified as a money transmission service or virtual asset provider, and then have to KYC the user for which it's offering a backup service. Services which facilitate backup recovery should be free or extremely cheap. I don't want to have to orange pill someone for like $200 and tell them that they need to pay $200 for hardware and pay a $50 a year subscription. Services that facilitate recovery should not have vendor lock-in, and backups should be portable outside from one wallet to another. Should be using essentially the BIP39, BIP44 standards. Backup services should not require special hardware or software and should leverage ubiquitous and widely available technologies. In other words, use a regular phone. And some observations that I had in thinking about these backup solutions. Number one is that a properly encrypted digital file is the safest way to protect a Bitcoin mnemonic from theft if the encryption is strong enough to prevent brute forcing, and if the encryption is performed in a device environment that is at least as secure as the one that was used for generating the keys and is used for signing transactions. Humans are bad at generating strong passwords, and any encryption key to encrypt anything should be randomly generated with sufficient entropy to prevent brute forcing attacks. And we cannot expect Bitcoin users to memorize randomly generated encryption keys with sufficient entropy. Humans are bad at backing up their data, both sensitive and non-sensitive, and cloud storage providers are, for most people, the best and easiest way to back up data, to protect your data against accidental loss. They're ubiquitous, they're part of people's habits. I use a cloud storage provider, you use a cloud storage provider, your mom uses a cloud storage provider, everybody uses cloud storage providers. Some of them are self-hosted, granted, but almost all of us do. Password managers are also, for most people, a convenient and secure way to back up their passwords. Again, ubiquitous, whether it's a self-hosted password manager or it's a hosted password manager, pretty much all of us are used to password managers. So cloud storage and password managers, these are things that everybody knows and everybody uses. The last observation is that a Bitcoin user is much more likely to be targeted by attackers trying to access their data than the average non-Bitcoin user. And therefore, Bitcoin users must take their data security more seriously than the average person. With that in mind, I am now going to do a demo of RecoverBull inside the Bull Bitcoin wallet. Please wait for the end of the video before making your mind and having an opinion on RecoverBull, because even though it looks simple, easy, and at first glance insecure, there's a lot more that goes on under the hood. All right, so here's the demo. We're gonna start off, first of all, with a fresh Bitcoin wallet. And as you can see, when I open the Bitcoin wallet, it says, on the home page, secure your, create a backup. Okay, so I click create a backup, and then I see two options. I see encrypted vault or physical backup. So encrypted vault is what we call RecoverBull because RecoverBull doesn't mean anything to the average person. And okay, so I'm gonna choose the encrypted vault option. All right, so I click that. The next step is I have to choose a vault location. So the user can either use Google Drive or they can use a custom location like saving the vault to their phone or to an external drive. So we're gonna click Google Drive. All right, now the app is signing in to Google Drive. And what's really important here is that Bull Bitcoin, as the wallet operator, we don't get the name or the email or anything, right? So that information stays inside the device. All right, next we're going to pick a password. So I'm going to pick 1971 2009. I can choose, for example, here, not to have a pin, but to add words and characters. But I'm going to choose a really dumb password like 1971 2009. All right, put it again, 1971 2009. Okay, great. Now it says connecting to key server over Tor. This can take up to a minute. And boom, just like that, the backup is complete. Now we're going to ask the user to test the backup to make sure everything's good. All right, test the wallet. Where was the backup stored? What type of backup did you do? Okay, encrypted vault. Where was it stored? Okay, Google Drive. Let's click that. All right, the wallet has successfully found the backup in Google Drive. We're going to click decrypt vault, put the password 1971 2009. Okay, connecting to key server over Tor. And then boom, test completed successfully. The user has created a Bitcoin wallet backup and tested the recovery in less than 2 minutes. It looks very simple, but under the hood, it's a lot more complex. So let's go step by step. First, the user starts off with a Bitcoin seed on their phone. The first thing that we do is we derive from the Bitcoin seed a backup key using BIP85. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking the entropy of the Bitcoin wallet itself, and we are creating a very, very long and randomly generated passphrase using the entropy of the wallet using BIP85. So if you could brute force or guess this backup key, it means that you could also guess the Bitcoin wallet mnemonic itself. So it's a very, very strong password. That's the point. Then we encrypt the mnemonic using the backup key that we derived from the mnemonic. And that gives us an encrypted mnemonic. Then we create a backup file. So the backup file contains the encrypted mnemonics. Here on this example, it's called the ciphertext, but it also contains a randomly generated ID, a randomly generated salt, and the BIP85 path that we used to generate that backup key from the mnemonic. So what we have now is that on the user's phone, we have the encrypted vault, which is the encrypted backup file, and we have the backup key, which can be used to decrypt the backup file. But of course, they're both on the user's phone. So now if you lose your phone, you're still screwed. So we're going to ask the user to export the backup file, like in our example, to Google Drive. But it can be anywhere. It can be Nextcloud, it can be Apple Cloud, or it can be like on another device. What's important is that you export it to a place where you're not going to lose it. And that place doesn't have to be very secure. That's the whole point. Now we're going to ask the user to put a password. Like in my example, it's 1971 2009. What do we do with the password? Well, from the password, we combine it with the salt that is randomly generated in the backup file, and we create two new keys, the authentication key and the encryption key, using a cryptographic hashing algorithm called Argon2. All right, so now that we have an encryption key, which we derived from the user's password and the salt, we will encrypt the backup key with the encryption key, which gives us an encrypted backup key. And here is where all the magic happens. There is something called the RecoverBull server. It is a web service that's operated anonymously by anyone, by a company, by you, by your friend. The app that is running RecoverBull, the Bull Bitcoin wallet, the first thing it does is that it starts a Tor connection, and it will connect to the RecoverBull server. The RecoverBull server is not accessible over ClearNet. It is Tor only. So the app contacts the RecoverBull server and says, hello, I have an authentication key and I have an identifier that I took from the backup file, and I have an encrypted backup key. Can you store that for me? The RecoverBull server, being very nice, is going to say yes, and it's going to take the authentication key that was generated, you'll remember, from the user's password, and the identifier that was generated randomly in the backup file is going to hash them together to create the key ID. And I will explain why it does that a little bit later. And it will store the encrypted backup key alongside the key ID, right? So what we have now is that the user has his encrypted backup in his drive. It contains the encrypted mnemonic, the identifier, the salt, and the derivation path. And the RecoverBull server has the encrypted backup key and the key ID. So it's kind of like a 2 of 2 storage solution where the encrypted file is hosted by the user himself or in a commercial cloud storage like Google Drive. But the encryption key to decrypt this file is hosted by the key server. So the key server is essentially an anonymous password manager that's built into the Bull Bitcoin wallet. All right, so what's really important here is that there is no data in the backup file that maps to anything in the encrypted backup key set and vice versa. So that's why, for example, when the key server receives the backup file, it takes the authentication key and the key ID and it hashes it together to create this new ID. So for example, if I have a backup file, there is no data in here that can help me find the right backup key. And if I have the backup key, I have no idea which backup file it corresponds to. And unless someone gives me both the backup file and the password, I cannot map one to the other. All right, so now we're assuming that I lost my phone. Okay, I lost my phone. I don't have a wallet. I download the wallet. Okay, I start the process. And the first step is obviously the user needs to import the backup file into the app, right? So whether that's Google Drive or whether that's somewhere else, the first step is to import the backup file. And in the backup file, there is the salt and the ID, and the user will add his password. And using the salt and the password, same as before, we get the authentication key and the encryption key. And we have the identifier from the backup file. So now we have all we need to connect to the RecoverBull server. So again, the app starts a Tor connection, contacts the server, and instead of saying, hey, keep this for me, it says, hey, here is my authentication key and my identifier. Can you please give me my encrypted backup key? And the key server, what it does is it doesn't it doesn't store authentication keys or identifiers. So what it's going to do is going to take those two, hash them together, and create the key ID. And it's going to look in its database and say, oh, actually, I do have this key ID, and there is an encrypted backup key. Here you go, and it's going to send the backup file back. But of course, we want to prevent brute forcing, right? So imagine that a hacker has found your backup file. What's stopping him from entering a gazillion passwords and generating new authentication keys and trying a million times to contact the RecoverBull server in order to get that backup key? Well, we enforce rate limiting at the key server level. This is the critical part of RecoverBull. So you can only try 3 times per day per identifier, right? So if you enter 3 times the wrong password, RecoverBull server is going to lock that key ID for 24 hours. So even if you have like a really shitty 6-digit PIN, a 6-digit PIN still takes 1 million attempts, and at 3 attempts per day, that is a very long time, right? That's why we have this concept of keeping the identifier for 24 hours, and after that we trash it, because we need to keep the identifier for 24 hours in order to enforce rate limiting every time there is either a fetch request or a store request. Okay, so assuming that the password was correct, the RecoverBull server gets the right authentication key, gets the right identifier, it hashes them together, it creates that key ID, it sees that there is an encrypted backup key. It doesn't need anything else. The user is authenticated, so to speak, and he will send the encrypted backup key back to whatever wallet asks for it, because it knows that that key could only have been, that authentication could only have been done by someone that has the backup file and the password. Okay, so now that we've downloaded the encrypted backup key from the RecoverBull server, we have the encryption key. We decrypt the encrypted backup key with the encryption key. So now we have the backup key and the encrypted backup file. We decrypt the encrypted backup file, and then boom, we get the 12-word mnemonic from the file. All right, so what's the security model? In essence, it's a 2FA backup system. One part of the secret is held by the user, either himself, self-hosted, or in a hosted commercial cloud storage provider. And the other part of the secret is stored in the RecoverBull server, which is, in essence, an anonymous password manager. It's actually more of a 3-of-3 backup because you also need the password in order to get the key from the key server. But technically, the user can also download a copy of the backup key himself in case the key server goes down, for example. So it's a 2-of-2 backup fundamentally, but in practice, it's more of a 3-of-3 backup. It leverages ubiquitous storage. So the default path is to use a commercial cloud storage provider, and that's to prevent loss. It uses client-side encryption with high entropy keys to prevent brute forcing. It uses rate-limiting fetch requests to the key server to prevent hacks. Most importantly, it is fully anonymous, so there is nothing that the key server knows about the user, and that is to protect the user from law enforcement requests, for example. So if the key server has no information about the user, it cannot give that information about the user to anybody who asks for it, and same thing for the cloud storage provider. And the key server itself is anonymous, so nobody knows who is running the key server. It can be a friend of yours. It can be just some random guy on the internet. It doesn't even need to be a corporation. There's no contract. There's not even a domain name. The key server is fully anonymous. So I just want to give a shout out to a guy called Tancred Hay. So I did not invent this concept. This concept was first implemented 5 years ago by this open source Bitcoin developer, Tancred, who created Photon SDK. So it was the same general concept of having a key server and, cloud storage provider. But what we did is basically we re-implemented or rewrote the whole thing from scratch. Like we just used the main concepts and we created our own thing using technologies and processes and techniques that we think are more anonymous and more secure. So shout out to Tancred. RecoverBull is an open source project, obviously, as most projects done by Bull Bitcoin. So the key server software is written in Rust, and anybody can host a key server software. The client library is written in Dart. There is a reference implementation in the Bull Bitcoin wallet. And we also have a white paper on the RecoverBull website. And I just want to reiterate this. This is not an alternative to long-term cold storage. This is not an alternative to hardware wallets, and it is not an alternative to Miniscript-based multi-sig wallet. It is an alternative to custodial exchange accounts, to custodial wallets, to physical backups for hot wallets, and to BIP39 passphrase for the physical backups of hot wallets. So essentially, you should use RecoverBull to save as much money as you are willing to have in your mobile wallet. All right. With that being said, I'm going to end this video with another demo of RecoverBull, because the first time you had no idea how it worked in the background. And now that you do, I hope you can appreciate how easy we made it all look. I want to thank you all for your time and attention. I hope you try out RecoverBull. I hope you tell your friends. Please let us know if there is anything you would like to change. It is an open source project, so we're open to all sorts of suggestions. All right, thanks for your time. Have a great day. And here's the demo again.